Well, hello and welcome to this ASANTI Data Centers webinar. My name is Veitch, and it's going to be my pleasure to present to you today. The subject we have today is public cloud. Does the reality meet the hype? And to answer that vexed question, we've got two experts. First of all, Stewart Laing. Stewart is the CEO of ASANTI. Welcome, Stewart.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stewart Laing. I'm the CEO of ASANTI Data Centers. I've been in the industry for a good number of years, close to 40 years. So it never ceases to amaze me the changes that takes place in the exciting industry that we operate in.
And we also have down the line, Andy Bevan of Wavenet. Andy, hi.
Thank you very much indeed, Martin. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Andy Bevan from Wavenet. I'm head of cloud specialists inside of our business, supporting our sellers across the entire range of cloud solutions, everything from co-location through private to public cloud.
So to start off with, we're going to lean a lot in this webinar on research conducted quite recently by ASANTI into public cloud and people's thoughts about public cloud, why they deployed, why they now maybe are repatriating data to quite a large extent, Stewart. Mm-hmm. And as the report makes clear, a lot of people have got a lot of concerns. They wouldn't have done it the same way if they were starting again today. Yeah. And the report asks a very good question, if I can look at my crib sheet quickly. Has the rush paid off? That cloud rush, about 2013, was maybe the zenith of it. Has that rush paid off? Has it been successful, do you think? First of all, actually, we start with Andy.
I think, Martin, your point about the lessons on that cloud first movement. I think we may have made a bit of a provocative statement saying cloud first is not a strategy. I think it's probably just in terms of how people understand it. I think a cloud solution is a strategy, but it doesn't necessarily have to mean public cloud. And I think that actually going with a hybrid solution of public and private and encompassing co-location, of course, is key to that strategy.
So, Stewart, you heard from Andy there, very interesting opening remarks. Do you concur with his point of view?
Yes, I do. Even before I started ASANTI, I spent quite a number of years actually working with organisations in this exact area. And the things that Andy's just commented on there, I would absolutely agree with. I saw that firsthand. We're now seeing a number of organisations now taking a hybrid approach to their data centre strategies and their cloud strategies.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I remember that stampede towards the cloud. And if you were a CIO at that time, it was almost a sort of badge of honour. It was something to have on your CV. Hey, I'm cloud first. I'm a pioneer. I'm not one of these drones who just likes to work in data centres all day. We want to create innovative, added value and all of these good things. But, as I say, a lot of people now are looking back and they're going to that more nuanced approach. And let's dig into that data a little bit, because when we asked the survey what they would have done if they'd gone back, they said they would have taken a hybrid path, as you point out, about 2/3 of respondents. They said they'd work with external independent consultants, get a second point of view, which makes sense. Definitely have a better understanding of T's and C's, terms and conditions of the cloud service provider. Undertake more internal due diligence, never a bad idea, and assess performance more thoroughly, make sure that the applications are actually performant. Do those things chime with your point of view?
Again, absolutely. I was actually, obviously you mentioned we commissioned this last year. I was actually surprised by the percentage that we're actually seeing in terms of people saying that they would be repatriating or they would have done things differently. I was seeing it firsthand. I think the surprise was something 98% of the companies that we didn't speak to them, but that was spoken to, confirmed that they certainly would do it differently next time around. They would take this. 2/3 said they would take a hybrid approach.
That's right.
So the percentages were actually higher than I thought, but I actually fully supported what we're seeing in the market now in terms of the moves that organisations are now making.
Yeah, and Andy, you work directly with a lot of people at the sharp end of this. Are you seeing pretty much the same thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd probably echo that around the hybrid piece. It's a very interesting case a little bit later in terms of that move to public cloud, especially with those supply chain constraints that we saw in the early days of the pandemic. And of course, the ability to continue with your existing data center strategy actually led many of our customers to acquire compute resources, storage, and such from the public cloud, but really very much as a necessary evil as they saw it, and they actually ended up with a hybrid by accident um, solution. And I think if people now are looking at it and going, well, actually the hybrid is right, but let's become more consciously hybrid about it. There was a necessity that pushed them in that direction early, and of course it had those that kind of consequence that the timing or the urgency to do something meant that assessing the right workload for the right place perhaps fell a little bit by the wayside. Not in all organisations clearly, but in some certainly.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. I think your point is very well made. That whole idea of having a horses for courses, pragmatic approach is really become the consensus view now, I think. Let's move on and talk a little bit about some of the specific challenges that the pioneers faced. 98%, almost every respondent who came to the survey said they experienced challenges migrating IT infrastructure, for example, to public cloud. Did you see that, Stewart? And do you still see those challenges even today?
I think I agree that there was a rush to that, and I suppose if you look at the IT industry generally and the major step changes that's taken place, and obviously public cloud was certainly one of these massive step changes that happened in our industry. I suppose unfortunately similar mistakes might have been made, and that people just thought, right, okay, we're going to go and do this, because in these situations what happens is all the industry starts talking about this new thing, whatever that is, and therefore they build the information, they build the hype to a certain extent, but organisations are always looking for advantages, they're always looking to see how IT can help them move forward, so you can kind of understand why they ended up going across to this technology as quickly as they can. But it was all new, and therefore you had challenges with things, like more sort of traditional applications, older applications that was running on older technologies, and all of a sudden they were trying to move all of that into completely new environments. So clearly there was always going to be significant challenges, but it's maybe not people didn't expect the number of challenges they actually had.
Absolutely.
Which is why we end up with 98% of them saying and there was lots of challenges for a lot of it.
Absolutely. You did have this sort of gold rush and this sort of feverish approach, didn't you? Andy, you're a veteran of the sector. You must have seen something pretty similar with your clients, did you?
Yeah, I think that was absolutely the case. And, that the skills, perhaps less so in terms of operation, but certainly in the understanding of the estate and its behaviour in a public cloud environment. And of course, remember, in the early days, public cloud was more or less a means to lift and shift an estate to operate on Microsoft or Amazon's platform in a more flexible manner. There wasn't really the ability to re-engineer applications and modernize as we can do today, obviously with the hundreds of services that are available to replace a traditional virtual machine. And I think that was absolutely the case. There perhaps wasn't the understanding, and of course that lack of understanding also led to potential concerns around, how do we secure and how do we govern that estate, either in the same way or to the same level that we've done in our previous incarnation on premise, which we've lovingly cared for over the last 10 or 15 years, and it's so well understood. It's an entirely new paradigm. It was actually quite difficult to get a head around it, but of course 10, 12, 15 years on, I think we all have much better understanding, but by the same token we're also left with some legacy of that initial phase.
Yeah, I think at the time it was seen as a bit of a universal panacea, and the CIOs could get really creative with their stuff and they weren't tied down by the chores and all of the day to day kind of work that goes together with running data center operations. Let's dig into the numbers a little bit. Survey pointed to the following being challenges: security governance, number one, followed by downtime, interruptions. Sometimes the service just wasn't available or it wasn't performant. Upskilling, you had to find people who had a different level of knowledge, and at the time, this was pretty much virgin territory. Time it took to migrate, as you said, some of those applications could be very hard to shift, especially what some people call legacy applications, older applications, and very often the most important applications, right? Core operations. Performance was another one. Application compatibility, just because it works on a IBM mainframe doesn't mean it's going to work on a Amazon cloud. Those are fairly familiar to you, are they? All of those ones, Stewart?
Sadly, yes.
Yeah. All of the above.
All of the above, yes. Yeah. I think one of the biggest challenges in IT departments, in-house IT departments, was that obviously this was a major shift for them, and therefore some of the skills didn't transfer easily.
Absolutely.
So there was a lot of upskilling had to be done, as you mentioned, something of existing staff to then manage effectively a cloud platform that was no longer on their premises. So it was a major change for them, and a challenge, I suppose, for them to understand what that really meant for them. And then, of course, then you had the concerns over security that started to come from it, because this was new. This was a new thing. It was new technology, and people were moving to this new opportunity for the reasons that they were being given the flexibility, the ability to, just to spin up additional servers as and when they needed them. These were all positive things, because if you had a fixed workload, then all of a sudden you could actually get access to things easily and quickly. So you didn't have to worry about buying another server license and putting another piece of hardware in. But again, that just led to it moved everything to a different area, but it just led to other challenges.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember at the time, I think there was that sort of feeling that, hey, we don't have to worry about this stuff anymore. We don't need these admin skills anymore because these third-party providers are going to sort everything out. It really wasn't like that at all. We needed a different set of skills, certainly. Yeah. And Andy, what about you? There were really significant operational issues, weren't there, that when people were moving towards these new, at the time, cloud environments?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've improved things no end over the last 10 years. If you cast your mind back 10 years ago, the cost of significant low latency bandwidth, back in the sort of the early teens, if you will, was inordinately expensive, and a recognition of the interdependency of applications, often meant that you would suffer from latency problems because you hadn't got one application local to one another, unless you threw an awful lot of money at it, and that was always going to be a tricky problem, to get that balance right. But I think the real key there, and you covered it slightly there, Martin touched on it, was the CIO throwing it over the fence to these public cloud providers without recognizing the, I think Microsoft terms it the shared responsibility model. It's understanding what the provider will do and what they won't do, and actually really understanding those gaps so that you can then maintain your governance correctly.
I think another major thing that happened at the time was, cloud was really sold as a cheap deal. You could get started quickly. You didn't have to buy all of these servers. You didn't have to pay all these data center admins, et cetera, et cetera. And yet when it all added up down the line, you paid for all these accretive services. You started to consume more and more. People got what the term that became popularized was bill shock. In other words, a bit like ordering a load of tapas in a Spanish restaurant. You buy one, and at first they seem pretty cheap, but then they all add up, and you get that bill, and you're not particularly happy with it. Andy, you saw that, I believe.
It is indeed, Martin. In fact, it goes on today. One of our core tenets, if you like, when we're discussing cloud consumption models with our customers is trying to uncover whether they understand exactly what it's costing, where it's costing them, and how they might be able to reduce that. And I think in the cloud market generally, FinOps is on everybody's lips. It still goes on today, and of course in the public cloud space, um, there are regular changes to pricing by the providers naturally, and it's something you've got to understand and then plan for and then mitigate and work out where your workloads really need to be. Is that on premise or in a data center? Is that in the public cloud? It's really key to keep control on cost. And certainly I saw that in projects, migrating out of public cloud because of exactly that problem to gain the performance that was required. Increase the subscription, and then the value wasn't there. So actually, there was a repatriation in the end.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Those are all great points, I think. What about you, Stuart?
Yeah, I suppose at that time there was another phrase that we used, I suppose, which was the capex to opex, so capital expenditure to operational expenditure, and that was attractive for organisations because now all of a sudden they didn't have to purchase hardware and software licensing, etc., for their own use. So they bought into this. It's never just an operational. We only pay for what we use, and that looked great. And in terms of the initial deployment and cost, it was. The reality came, however, in terms of the data. The cost of actually transferring the data was one of the huge things. And although there was flexibility in it in terms of how you use it, that flexibility also often meant costs that could be incurred without organisations actually realising they'd done it in the first place. So a technical person deciding that they need a new environment for a period of time, spin it up, forget about it, whatever. All of a sudden, the operational cost is now much higher than they expected. And that, as I said, that's what we saw with the paper. I think it was over 2/3 of companies actually saw that in practice. So yeah, it was a common issue.
Yeah, Andy, you mentioned FinOps, which is a very fast evolving business, bringing together the sort of finance and the IT sides of the house, and trying to really put a price on the cost of operations so that the CFO and the CIO are speaking the same language. So what I want to ask you is, from your point of view, are you seeing it become a lot more mature, or people behaving in a more grown-up way where they really are anticipating costs and being ready for the true price at the end of the bill?
Yeah, it has massively, Martin. I think FinOps, software developers out there, and there are some excellent tools to cover all of the public clouds and indeed to assess private cloud operations. The capabilities there, and in fairness, it's not just the overall business that's looking at those cost constraints. Think about cross-charging. It's the ability to tag and to understand where the cost is going inside of an organisation, and cross-charge. So there is the control or the recharge element, which is great for the CFO and so on and so forth. But being able to understand the cost of an individual resource, and is it operating in the right manner? Could it be done in a cheaper way, a different way? Absolutely fits into the technical side as well. We've seen examples of looking at reporting, and there has been some bill shock, and we discovered that a developer had spun up a fairly high-powered compute resource for some testing, and then failed to spin it down. And of course, it was then operating in the background, unbeknownst to anybody, for some time. And with the associated bill, it's something we do see, and it's also that pressure from the CIO, if you like, to his infrastructure guys, going, "We've got a budget here. Why am I spending all of this money? What's going on?" Yeah.
Yeah, I think those are very fair points. I mean, if we dig into the numbers a little bit from the survey, cost of operations post move, about a third said costs in public cloud significantly higher than expected, 44%, somewhat more. So, a large majority of people getting surprised by the operations costs, overall costs. 17% said significantly higher than expected, 33%, somewhat more. And then the time it took, not everything is pounds, dollars, and euros. 21% said significantly longer than expected, and time is money effectively with these things, and 36% saying somewhat longer. So it's a bit of a tale of woe, isn't it, that we're hearing there, Stuart?
Yeah, as I said earlier, I think it was a new world to a certain extent, and organisations were keen to take advantage of that technology. But I suppose the awareness, the understanding wasn't there. You mentioned earlier about it, have organisations and people moved on in terms of their understanding? Absolutely. I think over the last, I can go back long enough that most organisations had no idea about what IT really was, and but that has completely changed. The organisations and the people that operate within them, they have very, very good understanding now of our industry and how it works, and that's great because, as I say, it allows them as well to ensure that the company no longer ends up in situations like what they ended up with there, because as you say, there was lots of challenges and issues, whether it was finance, whether it was operations, whether it was actually managing the environment as well. So the resourcing and skill set. So it was a complete sea change.
Yeah.
That happened very, very quickly.
Really quickly.
But people have learned from it now, and we're in a much, much more mature place now.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about repatriation as well, because that's a trend we're seeing in bucket loads, and it's certainly evidenced in this research report. I think 9 out of 10, 91% said they have plans to bring apps back on premises, or already doing so in some cases. Why is this stampede now, instead of being cloud first, to repatriate data?
Yeah, I think, Martin, it goes without saying. The repatriation is absolutely a thing, as we seem to say these days. Costs are certainly one of them, but I think there is an understanding that the hybrid model is absolutely the right way to go, and becoming that consciously hybrid organisation. I think people are revisiting where their applications and their data are best placed. So we're not seeing a wholesale repatriation by any means, but I think with the expansion of AI services, for example, which I think we'll probably cover later, but um, often AI solutions will lend themselves to what we would describe as edge processing. And while the initial models, the initial training, maybe there's some test and dev work goes on in the public cloud. The reality is it actually lives more comfortably local to the production of the data, or the consumption of the inference, if you will. I think and it also boils down to things like latency. No matter how much bandwidth you throw at things, the speed of light rule applies, right? If you've got something inside of a data center talking to another resource, and it is latency dependent, it's clearly going to perform better.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. And Stuart, from your point of view, you seeing lots of folks wanting to bring their apps back into the data center and away from cloud?
Yes, I think over the last few years, I say that as more people have started to understand what's best for their organisations, then as Andy's covered very well there, we're certainly seeing a significant increase in organisations now taking the time, and I think this is the key actually for organisations. I've been talking about this now for a number of years. Is just take the time to understand what you need as a business.
Yeah.
And once you've got that, then you then feed that information in and develop the strategies that best fits for your business, and that's one of the key things. There isn't a one size fits all. There is all sorts of technologies, and the organisation will use those in whatever proportion they feel is best for them. But I think that's one of the significant things we're now seeing more of now. And I say that just speaks back to the maturity of organisations and the understanding of what is best for them.
Yeah, aligning everything against the business need rather than just jumping on a technology because it looks appealing in the first place. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, if we look at some of the responses when we said to people, what were the challenges? High recurring costs was the top answer, closely followed by control and the ability to customize, followed by security, latency, compliance, all these familiar themes that we're talking about all through this webinar. Outages risk, integration, which is also another interesting one if you've still got some applications on-prem, and erratic billing, seeing that bill shock that we talked about earlier. They're all highly familiar to you, I suspect, Stewart.
Certainly the report we got back certainly indicated a significant of buyer's regret. There was 67% of the organisations said they would have taken a hybrid approach, and there was almost 50% realised that they should have spent more time to understand the requirements. And that ties in exactly with what we see, exactly what we've actually been saying now for the past quite some time, actually, when we've been trying to advise organisations in the approach they should take.
I think, as you say, these days, I think it seems like blindingly obvious, really, doesn't it? But you should take a horses for courses approach. You should be pragmatic. You should make sure all of this stuff is aligning with what the business is trying to achieve. But for a little while there, people maybe lost their minds a tiny bit and jumped on that new technology. Very good reasons for adopting it in many cases, but it sometimes came back to bite them quite nastily.
Yeah, the IT industry, as I say, going back many years, we've seen this unfortunately repeated a few times because it's something that's new. I have spent a number of years with organisations in exactly this space.
Yeah.
And the key was for them to learn to understand what they actually required. And that was always the message. It was actually, we used to use a very similar process when people looking at disaster recovery.
Yeah.
Understand what you had so that you could then put the solution together, understand what you required so you could put the solution. And it's exactly the same approach. It does take time. And what we're seeing is organisations now, I believe, taking that time to understand, because every solution is different. Every organisation needs something a little bit different. And even though we're using the same technologies, it's how we then structure that using those technologies to give them the solution that they actually need as a business.
Right. Yeah.
And for me, that's the key thing for organisations is make sure that what you have is what you need, something that will help you in your business, that will drive your business forward. That's the benefit that you can get if you do this properly.
Yeah, and Andy, from your point of view, you're saying that the hybrid model is enabling that.
Yeah, absolutely, Martin. I think hybrid is here to stay. Goes without saying, because really your processing should follow your data, and of course, the nature of transferring of data, the cost of data moving around. Public clouds are famous for egress charges, so pushing vast quantities of data up and then retrieving it again becomes costly and time consuming. Having your data in the right place and then processing it locally makes absolute sense. And that could be for a number of reasons. It could be for compliance reasons. It may be that it is so sensitive, or culturally the business wants to keep their arms around it. It could be sensitive IPR. It could be for financial services reasons. It could be for, I suppose, straight into the defence industries and so on, where they're governed very, very stringently. But conversely, simple things can easily be pushed out to the public cloud. Especially where there needs to be global reach, with content delivery and so on and so forth. It's not really practical on-prem. So hybrid, absolutely, yeah, is the way forward.
Yeah, I think those are all great points, Andy. The challenging thing is today there's obviously a lot of data repatriation going on, but that's not going to be a universal panacea either. It's not going to be any quick fit or easy ride. When we ask people about challenges that they see in terms of repatriation, downtime and interruptions, 49%, skills, 41%. You've got to be able to put these things back where they belong. Migration complexity, 38%. Time, 37%. Everyone wants to move quickly, but this is challenging stuff. And then, some of the T's and C's we mentioned earlier, contractual complications, or maybe cancellation fees you might have to pay to get out of a deal when you've been with one of the big cloud platform providers. Stewart.
Yeah, I think with any IT project, these are all the things that you have to consider. And clearly, well, you will need some downtime to bring it back out, for example. How the essential thing is how you manage that,
Yeah.
and you manage the project to enable that to happen. I suppose it is going to be that discussion or that decision again on the cost element and the challenges of being in the public cloud against actually what happens once so that we've got to move, but once you've moved, what does that give you?
Yeah.
So I suppose it's for organisations to understand what does this mean for us when we do this? What's the benefits of actually moving certain things? It won't be everything, absolutely not. There's many things that will stay in public cloud. It works very well in many occasions. But it's back to what we said before. It's about getting the right thing for your organisation moving forward.
Right.
So there is a short-term element in terms of the change, but then you get through that, and it's what's the advantages that it gives you in the longer term.
Yeah, so you're balancing risk reward and looking at ROI and so on.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We're not here to sort of batter public cloud. I think we all agree, don't we, that there's a big place for public cloud, highly commoditized applications and so on, very repeatable, very easy to internationalize, to get licensing moving very quickly without being tied to enterprise software licenses.
Yeah, public cloud absolutely has its place, whether that's in terms of effectively unlimited scalability, albeit perhaps for short periods, and certainly the on tap nature of it. I mentioned in that previous section as well the kind of the ubiquity globally. You could take AWS or Azure, the ability to replicate an environment globally in multiple regions, with identical implementations is absolutely absolutely excellent. And indeed, in terms of content delivery, being able to serve your customer base globally is great. I think the use for develop quickly, test, fail fast, all of those good things. Public cloud is absolutely a valuable place to do it before you perhaps bring it back in house. And of course, don't forget that with the likes of Azure Local, the ability to bring a region in privately is a great story for those customers who still need to have local processing but still want a consistent experience.
So it really is a great sandbox, very easy to try things out very quickly without great risk or cost penalties. And we know that it can have a really strong place in that kind of innovative, dynamic environment where you're wanting to try things out and you're not worried about failing too quickly. I wanted to jump on to AI. We haven't really mentioned it yet. And of course, it is very much the topic du jour at the moment. That's an interesting one because of the compute resources needed for AI. Is that going to be a good fit potentially for cloud? It's interesting in the survey, 52% of respondents said they're prioritizing their own servers for the AI opportunity, which suggests maybe they want to keep the data either close to their vests or that they feel that they need that compute capacity that they can't potentially get maybe in a colo provider. They may not know about that. What do you think, Andy?
I guess it's the interpretation of AI. It was rather like cloud 15 years ago, when a chief exec would say to his IT director, "I want a cloud." AI has so many facets. Often we're seeing a chief exec having toyed with Chat GPT and saying to his CIO, "I want an AI." It's all about understanding the role of AI in the business, and again goes back to that whole point about data. What is it that you're trying to do, and what data are you going to use to achieve the outcome you want from it? And of course, then that feeds into what location should it be in. Clearly, public cloud has a massive part to play in AI processing. Again, it's about scale. It's about being able to develop quickly in a more agile way to prove the value of a particular use case. But processing locally or instant inferencing in critical systems means that it then becomes a private solution, an on-premise solution. So I think I think AI actually will live across all possible estates. And if you think about it, we see that everything from our mobile phones to our endpoints with Microsoft Copilot to then predictive maintenance to AI ML and so on and so forth. It runs across the entire spectrum of possible locations.
Well, Stewart, you've heard what Andy said. You concur or disagree?
Yes, I totally agree with what he's saying. There's two main elements to AI just now in terms of our industry. The first element is we hear about all the learning modules that goes on, and that requires a huge amount of powerful computing. I think where it then changes is when you actually have the applications, and those are the applications I believe they're talking to, where organisations saying they want to bring them local. So and that's what I see, and I think that's what Andy's referring to there as well, is that we do have two distinct parts, and the cloud providers, the hyperscalers, are set up to actually provide the learning module capabilities. But once it goes past that, then we do see it coming more local to the user, because there's going to be a lot of applications that are going to actually need, because of what they do and the way they operate, will actually drive that back closer to the user. Right.
Look, I want to go through to the audience's questions now, much more importantly than my ones. First question we had in from the audience was, given Europe's growing concerns about data privacy and the dominance of US tech giants, do you think we'll start to see UK and European countries reducing their reliance on American cloud services while ensuring data sovereignty and perhaps fostering local innovation? That would be an epic trend and very tough for US tech, and a real change in the water. Andy, are you seeing any of this so far?
Yeah, I think that's funnily enough. I think that was probably historically the case. There was always a concern that even though you knew that you'd got UK West and UK South as your regions, we would often get questions from customers who would say, well, look, if I put my data there, is there any risk that it could find its way to the US? There was obviously the whole thing about the Patriots Act. If it's in an American business, can US departments or US businesses access my data? Absolutely, it's been a challenge. And what we're seeing, and indeed actually over time, we've seen private cloud solutions being promoted inside of the UK for sovereign data center use. And I don't think that's going away. I think it's for probably quite niche use cases. And bearing in mind, there's that ability to protect your data and to encrypt it, to keep it secure in the public cloud. But I think there are some use cases where sovereign is going to be key.
Yeah, very interesting times we're in. It's interesting from your point of view. I'm sure, Stewart, you've got a lot of these local edge data centers in towns and cities throughout the UK, don't you? Any trend away from dependence on US tech and towards having data on site or in country rather is going to be a net positive for you, I guess, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. I think for the data center industry as a whole in the UK, then I do see that being an advantage to our businesses. That's certainly a positive from our perspective. I do think that the as we see the repatriation happening and organisations, the concerns they have, certainly security is, I think, will probably become a bigger concern. We've seen just in the last few weeks various articles that I've read talking about the Patriot Act and obviously the Cloud Act as well, which came into place around 2017-18. There's certainly growing concerns now as to what that's actually going to mean. So I think that'll actually further fuel the repatriation element of organisations that are coming away from the hyperscale solutions, the public cloud solutions, because of the fact they're American organisations.
Yeah, sure. Question here for you, Andy. How do organisations like Wavenet help businesses who want to shift all or part of their operations down from public cloud?
Yeah, as an MSP, I mean, organisations like Wavenet, there are many of varying sizes and scale out there, but in our case particularly, it's all about assessment, and it's all about business outcomes. That's really the crux of it all. The technology is almost secondary. We need to understand what the business is trying to achieve or what its challenges are, and then it's assess again, and then plan. And then we can work out an optimum technology solution, but balance that crucially with the cost exposure. And often we will find ways to reduce cost in the longer term as well. So that could be by moving out to private. It could be by refactoring public, and so on. And I think if you take that whole assessment piece, it kind of proves a point in the AI space that we're seeing as well. What are people really trying to do? They're not sure. And indeed, that whole piece around, what are we going to do with AI that you mentioned earlier? It's about actually going sort of right to that outcome. What are you trying to do with your data? How do you think you can do it? And of course, is that causing a slowdown in the take up? In some areas, it may not be, but perhaps more recently we've seen that Microsoft have just scrapped sort of some data center proposed data center growth plans in the US, ostensibly to do with pausing their support with OpenAI. Who knows whether that's really the case? Could it be power costs? Could it be other factors? But certainly, AI has got a huge part to play in whatever it is we see going forward. But as you say, it's all about assessment. Without that, if you can't understand what it is that you have, you can't know where you're going to take it.
Yeah, fascinating developments with AI and cloud and so many other converging trends at the moment. But look, we're going to have to wrap up. Our time here is done. But maybe we could just get closing thoughts from you guys. What's the final pearls of wisdom you want to impart, Andy? And then after that, Stewart, how about that?
Yeah, thanks, Martin. I think it's all about hybrid. That's got to be the answer for the future. Of necessity, to be honest, because of localized processing, bring the data to the user. The public cloud has got a massive part to play. And I think the important thing is about understanding your workload environment and your data, placing them in the right place, and using the features, facilities, capabilities of both the private and the public to serve them out to the best result for the organisation. And of course, whether that's over one side in private cloud, or far over to the left for very specialist or on-premise solutions, the use of co-location facilities is going to play a part for the foreseeable.
Andy has certainly summed it up very, very well. We are in an ever-changing world, and as we've talked at length at where we believe the industry is moving to and where customers are moving to. It's an exciting time for ASANTI as a co-location provider, as we see the industry develop and grow within the UK.
Yeah, absolutely. It is an exciting time for everyone in the sector. I think so many mega trends going on, and we'll see how they play out in the coming months and years. But that's all we've got time for on this ASANTI Data Centers webinar. Thanks so much for joining in, and we hope to see you again soon.